Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I'm going to cover a guy by the name of Lieutenant Commander Dr. Thomas Narut, Narut. He's come up in a bunch of conversations that I've had in episodes and very interesting background. But in the lead into discussing Narut, I'm going to cover a political assassin, the guy Lance Belter, and he was the guy in Minnesota who murdered two people. He was in the Minneapolis area, but he himself has an interesting background and an interesting confession. And he's a story in itself in a lot of ways. But this was the shooting that took place. He killed Minnesota House Speaker Emerita Melissa Hortman and her husband and their dog. And then he drove somewhere else and shot State Senator John Hoffman and Yvette Hoffman. And he kind of did it in a sophisticated manner. He was impersonating a cop. He had a full face mask. He was stalking them, so it wasn't a crime of passion. This is June 2025. This is just one assassination, and a whole spate of assassinations this year and recently. So I've titled this "Political Assassin Lance Boelter, Lieutenant Commander Thomas Narut, and the Days of Lead," because there's just so much going on. Boelter was an appointee by Waltz, right? Waltz is the guy who ran for vice president with Kamala Harris. And he laid the blame for the shooting on Waltz. At least I think there was a public statement. I believe the story's kind of dropped off, but it shouldn't have. I don't know where they're at. He was charged with a bunch of charges. I don't know where they are in the thing. Boelter was 57, kind of relatively older guy, and had a religious background and traveled around the world in Gaza, in Congo, in strange places. And there's conflicting accounts about his political affiliation. Of course, these people, just like they did with Kirk, a leftist killed him. They're establishing this story about who did what, or I saw a leftist do that. I saw that today. Nobody saw the guy shoot Charlie Kirk, by the way. That's false and a lie. But Boelter was a Democrat. He had like strange background, security background, but he also had like a confession that he wrote to Kash Patel. So it kind of overlaps with the Kirk assassination, actually, in a way. But he had all this target list of, bigwigs and things like that. He was on the run for 2 days, is my understanding. The attacks occurred June 14th, 2025. And he announced he was the police, and he got close to him. And according to the federal indictments, Boelter stalked his victims for an extended period, compiling detailed information on the routines and residents. So there's elements of premeditation and also some sophistication, which is really interesting. And usually possibly using digital tools like tracking devices and things like that. They were his guns. The motive is kind of somewhat murky, although the prosecutors called it a political assassination. And he said he was dissatisfied with their stances, which it's kind of odd. Like, there's not a lot of stuff. I'll show his appointment by Waltz in some of the slides that I have. But that'll be my lead in to Dr. Thomas Narut, Lieutenant Commander. This guy's a high-ranking naval guy from 75. And I'll read from Dave McGowan's treatment of Narut in Program to Kill as well. So this is what he looks like. If you're watching this on X or my YouTube channel, which I got back, or Rumble, this is Lance, Boelter. And this is when he was arrested. He was on the run for 2 days. He was hiding out in the woods close to his house. Kind of looked like he was prepped to stay outside. Those are his arrest things. But this is kind of creepy. This is what he looked like. He had a full-on rubber mask and police outfit and tactical gear. Like, this is not some crime of passion or something like that. And this is I think a picture that was taken with somebody's Ring camera. And there he is, kind of director of security. So he has kind of a security background. He also has a really interesting religious background. We'll get to that too. But this is from Ken Silva. Police saw Minnesota assassin run into lawmaker's house, but waited an hour to pursue him. That's interesting. The officer believed Boelter was a police officer who was checking on so-called and asked Boelter to roll down his window. He was a bald white male staring straight ahead. Boelter didn't respond to the New Hope officer who left to check on him, left on somebody else. So that's like an odd story. Like what's going on? Waited an hour to pursue him, and he looks like he is able to change his kind of views. Like he's a disguised guy. He's dressed in some kind of outback outfit here. If you're watching this, these are the two people he killed. His husband and wife, and wounded this other senator, John Hoffman and Yvette Hoffman. So that's her, Melissa Hortman, Hortman. And then this letter, which we'll get to. In a rambling conspiratorial letter addressed to the FBI, alleged assassin Vance Boelter claimed Governor Tim Walz instructed him to kill Senator Amy Klobuchar so that Walz could run for the U.S. Senate, according to two people familiar with the contents of the letter. The letter is the clearest evidence yet of Boelter's mindset after the targeted violence against Minnesota politicians last week. It is incoherent, 1.5 pages long, confusing and hard to read, according to two people familiar with the letter's contents. It includes Boelter alleging he had been trained by the U.S. military off the books, and that Walz, who is not running for Senate, asked him to kill Klobuchar and others. So this U.S. military, and that's the whole thing about Narut. Narut makes this allegation that they took former criminals and trained them to kill, basically programmed to kill, and then spread them around in diplomatic offices all around the world. So this is it. Supposedly is, 57. This is him. He works for this kind of murky group, CEO Red Lion Group. Looks like he has a doctorate in education, so he's Dr. Vance Boelter. Kind of wears a bunch of different hats. This is Julio Rosas. I'm told by a police source in Minnesota the suspect in the shootings of Minnesota state lawmakers is Vance Luther Boelter. He's the same Boelter who was appointed by the governor's Workforce Development Board in 2019 by Walz, and then appointed in 2016 by Mark Dayton. So he has kind of a political background in Minnesota, no question about it. And this is his own CV. It's Dr. Vance Boelter has been involved with security situations, very vague, security situations in Eastern Europe, Africa, North America, and the Middle East, including the West Bank, Southern Lebanon, and the Gaza Strip. He brings a great security aspect forged by both many on-the-ground experiences combined with training by both private security firms and by people in the U.S. military. He has worked with the largest U.S. oil refining company, the world's largest food company based in Switzerland, and the world's largest convenience retailer based in Japan. So kind of strange, like international, but also working for conglomerates, it looks like. This is from Johnny Kalani Pingosh. The alleged Minnesota lawmaker shooting suspect works for a Minnesota-based security firm and has security situations and experience in lands. So you can just kind of see this here. His work experience on LinkedIn, Red Lion Group, based in the DRC. Remember the coup there last May that tied the Israeli intel, the U.S., and the vape industry. So that's the Democratic Republic of Congo. And we'll see this. He's literally preaching in the Congo. It's so strange. This guy, he has all the kind of deep state stuff. MK Ultra never actually ended. Wait, intel agencies program damage military personnel for killing and domestic terror? Yeah, so like Boelter kind of fits into this. And then this is Boltzmann Booty. Sounds like a completely organic six-fold spike in terrorism by U.S. military employees. So there you see him. He's wearing a hat and different. He seems to have different guises and things like that. He was caught Sunday night in the woods, Green Isle, Minnesota. So like a couple days after that. These are the victim. That's his victim. For some reason, he went after her. Again, Kalani Pin. There's like other things going on. There's a knife attack. This is like 09 Ace type stuff. August 2025. The Red Lion Group, Cardinal Stritch University, Greater Minneapolis, 2,000 followers. Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, right? So weird things that were going on there. He seems to be around that. The cover story, or the story that may be real, is that he was upset about denying healthcare benefits to illegal aliens, but there's nothing about him that kind of puts that in writing. This is the movie Drive, same kind of mask. Apparently, like he had a legend, like no king's legend, like a democratic kind of view. There's Waltz. Keep your friends close and your assassination targets closer. I guess Klobuchar is a piece of work. So this is his manifesto, and I'll read the whole thing. Dear Kash Patel, my name is Dr. Vance Luther Boelter, ED. I am the shooter at large in Minnesota involved in the school shootings the morning of Saturday, June 15th at approximately 2:30 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. or around that time. I will probably be dead by the time you read this letter. I wanted to share some info with you that you might find interesting. I was taken by U.S. military people off the books starting in college. He's 57 now. I have been on projects since that time in Eastern Europe, North America, Middle East, and Africa. AM in the line of duty, what I thought was right and in the best interest of the United States. Recently, I was approached about a project that Tim Waltz wanted done, and blank blank and Kurth blank was also aware of the project. Tim wanted me to kill Amy Klobuchar and blank. Tim wants to be a senator and he doesn't trust blank to retire as planned and thinks she is going to stay and be on the last mate with Amy. And then Tim would get out of the Senate seats and blank wants to be governor. And Keith Eisland would Keith Ellison, excuse me, would, it's hard to read, be readied with a latest governor's position. I told Tim, so he's saying he's talking to Tim Waltz. I told Tim that I wanted nothing to do with it, and that he didn't call that plan I would go public. He said that it would hurt anybody if I did play ball. Then he set up a meeting with me and blank to go talk about something. When I stood, they had some people wanting to kill me. I was able to get away by God's mercy. So I went back a short time later and battled with blank. They should note that I didn't fire me, ran at my police officers, and boy, did I have plenty of opportunity. Ask for the report on how my weapons and ammunition I had on me. So that's part of the note. Yeah, Keith Ellison would be rewarded with lieutenant governor's position. You had 2 murder charges, second degree, not the intro. This is Jedediah Hartley. You can check that out. I'll put a link to his Jedediah's X account, but he says that Boelter was like a member of the NAR, right? This is kind of, according to many Christians, myself included, it's kind of a heretical new church within Christianity. And here's what Jedediah writes. Vance Boelter, the man arrested for assassinating 2 government officials and their spouses, is directly affiliated with the New Apostolic Reformation, NAR, and after watching several of his sermons, which we're going to watch in a second, it's clear to me that he was radicalized by NAR rhetoric. This thread is going to be long, so quick TDLR. 1. Boelter attended Christ for the Nations Institute, a known NAR training ground. 2. In his sermons, he echoes core NAR rhetoric by demonizing America's acceptance of abortion and home. These are typically conservative views, so he's supposedly left wing. In his sermons, he echoes core Nar rhetoric by demonizing America's acceptance of abortion and homosexuality and preaching on how God will appoint, quote, apostles and prophets, unquote, to correct the church. And those are like the titles within Nar, like the literally bringing back it's kind of like an apostolic reformation or something. 3, and most shockingly, he repeatedly references his history with a member of the New Adams Farm in Zimbabwe, an obscure commune that was funded in part by Mike Bickle in the deeply Nar community I was raised in. Now, to go more in depth. 1, first, for those who don't know, the New Apostolic Reformation Nar is a term commonly used to describe a network of charismatic Christian churches and leaders centered around a belief in modern apostles and prophets, dominionism via the Seven Mountain Mandate, Christian Zionism and end-time revivalism, emphasis on supernatural gifts, healing, tongues, and prophecy, and spiritual warfare against demonic forces and territorial spirits. 2, the movement has long been criticized for its cult-like structures, lack of accountability, and alignment with Christian nationalism. In recent years, many former members of this network, including myself, have come forward to expose a deeper pattern of fraud, spiritual abuse, and rampant sexual violence being perpetrated and covered up by many of the movement's most visible leaders. 3, the NAR also places a deep emphasis on raising up and radicalizing the next generation. To that end, it has established several colleges, all unaccredited, designed to formalize and spread the rhetoric of NAR leaders. One such institution is Christ for the Nations Institute, CFNI, in Dallas, Texas. Founded by Gordon Lindsay, a key charismatic figure who helped pave the way for the NAR movement, CFNI centers its core curriculum around many of the doctrines outlined above. The school also regularly amplifies the voices of prominent NAR leaders such as Bill Johnson, Heidi Baker, and Cindy Jacobs. This morning, I spoke with NAR historian John Collins, who told me that CFNI isn't just connected to the NAR, but foundational to the movement. 4, according to Boelter's old ministry website and his own sermons, he attended Christ for the Nations Institute as a young Christian. Now, many years later, Boelter still echoes the same New Apostolic Reformation rhetoric he was once radicalized by. In this clip, I'll show you this clip. In this clip, Boelter talks about division in the American church, blames abortion in the absence of spiritual gifts as signs that Satan has taken hold, and declares that the apostles and prophets being raised up to bring correction to the American church. So let's see if we can bring that up. I think this is it.
In school, I went to college and I met a believer.
Et à l'école, je suis allé à l'université, j'avais trouvé un croyant
who discipled me and taught me much about Jesus.
et qui a parlé trop de Jésus à moi.
His name was David Emerson.
Son nom était David Emerson.
About a year later, after I had met him, he told me he was so excited. He said, "I'm going to Africa."
Et une année après, quand je l'ai rencontré, il était très excité. Il m'a dit, je vais en Afrique.
I'm going with the ministry.
Je vais avec le ministère.
And we're going to dig wells for people because they need good water.
Et nous allons commencer à creuser des puits pour des gens parce qu'ils ont besoin d'eau.
And then we'll share the gospel.
Et puis, partager aussi l'évangile, prêcher l'évangile. Et il est perdu.
People came to their farm site where they were living.
Les gens sont venus dans la ferme là où ils vivaient.
And they didn't want to use guns.
Et ils n'ont pas voulu utiliser les armes.
Because guns were too loud.
Parce que les armes étaient trop bas.
So they came with machetes.
Ils sont venus avec des machettes comme de Kuluna.
And they killed everybody.
Et ils ont tué tout le monde.
My friend,
mon ami,
his fiancée,
sa fiancée,
and about 16 other people.
Et environ 16 autres personnes.
Only 2 children survived that hid.
So that's kind of the massacre. I think this is another clip. Let me see, remove video file.
Many churches in America
Beaucoup d'églises aux États-Unis
didn't listen to Jesus.
n'ont pas écouté Jésus.
They're divided.
Ils sont divisés.
This little group here,
Ce petit groupe ici,
this little group
il y a un
here,
autre groupe petit, un petit groupe là-bas,
this little group
un autre
here,
groupe, petit groupe de ce côté,
and the enemy,
et l'ennemi,
the devil,
le diable,
comes through
et il est venu au travers d'eux,
and rips everything apart.
et il a volé, il a détruit toutes choses.
The churches are so messed up.
Les églises sont vraiment en désastre.
They don't know abortion is wrong, many churches.
La plupart des églises aux États-Unis soutiennent l'avortement.
They don't have the gifts flowing.
Ils ne vont pas avoir les dons en train de couler.
God gives the body gifts
Le Seigneur a fait des dons aux églises,
to
au corps,
keep balance.
pour pouvoir maintenir l'équilibre.
Because when the body starts moving in the wrong direction,
Parce que quand le corps du Christ est en train d'aller vers une mauvaise direction,
when they're one
parce que ils sont en train d'aller dans une mauvaise direction,
and accepting the gifts,
et quand ils acceptent les dons qui viennent d'ailleurs,
God will raise an apostle or prophet
le Seigneur va envoyer un apôtre ou un prophète
to correct their
pour
course.
pouvoir corriger le tout et remettre tout en ordre.
But God is going to raise up apostles and prophets in America
Le Seigneur va relever des pasteurs et des prophètes aux États-Unis
to correct his church.
pour corriger son église.
And those that are connected to the
Et
body,
ceux qui sont connectés au corps,
they will come through this mess
ils vont quitter de cette confusion.
and they will be strong again.
Et ils seront forts encore.
And once again, they'll send missionaries
Et encore,
out
ils vont encore commencer à envoyer des missionnaires au travers du monde.
and be a blessing.
Et ils seront encore une fois de plus une bénédiction.
So I think that that's kind of indicative of NAR theology, this apostles and prophets and the gifts and all that stuff. And I think Jedediah Hartley talks about it. Again, it's at Jedediah Hartley. I'll put that in the show notes. But he says, Boelter hits on many of the most recognizable NAR talking points. Spiritual warfare against the church, emphasis on supernatural gifts, need for modern apostles and prophets to correct the church, and demonization of abortion and LGBTQ identities. So that's like very right. That's not the so-called democratic talking points that he supposedly had. You know, no kings like pamphlets in his car. All this alone is enough to demonstrate Boelter's deep association with the NAR, but two of his sermons, he referenced New Family's Farm. The story of New deserves its own thread. I don't know much about the New Family Farm. I guess this guy Jedediah's family had been at the farm and something horrible happened there. But Jedediah continues, I believe Boelter's proximity to the NAR and his full embrace of NAR rhetoric absolutely played a role in his radicalization. Just a few weeks ago, I was speaking publicly about the dangers of violent rhetoric within NAR circles and how that language is no longer just metaphorical. It's beginning to spill over into real political violence. For decades, extreme NAR rhetoric has been used to justify and conceal sexual violence. Now I believe it's being used to radicalize, incite political violence. So that's Jedediah Hartley. Again, thanks, Jedediah. That's some insight into possibly Boelter. He let's see. There's other like videos of Boelter that I found. Let's see if I can find those. He's excited about Jesus.
And I'm just as excited about Jesus.
Et je suis juste excité
Right
de
here,
Jésus.
right now.
Jusqu'à présent, même maintenant.
And when I get excited,
Et quand je suis excité,
I want to dance.
je veux danser.
And what Jesus did for me.
C'est que Jésus a fait.
This is a guy who allegedly killed 2 people and wounded 2 other ones. I mean, this is to me is like real true detective stuff. Super creepy. And the fact that he wrote in his so-called confession, he got involved in kind of dark stuff from college, recruited out of college, and moved around a lot. Like his resume, he's bouncing around different continents, not just countries. What else has he been up to? And he shows kind of a relative sophistication. He also writes in his manifesto or whatever that he expected to be dead, which is like a real kind of, he had a knowledge of these. I would say it indicates to me kind of a knowledge of these assassins where they end up getting assassinated. And then all, the loose ends are tied up, right?
Pour moi.
Jesus is God.
Jésus est
Almighty
Dieu.
God.
C'est le Dieu
He
puissant.
saved my life.
Il a sauvé
This is in the Congo, by the way.
ma vie.
I'm excited about God.
Je suis excité de
And
Dieu.
I want to worship Him.
Et c'est pourquoi je l'adore.
Because He
If he's telling the truth about his resume, that means he's like working security things while he's preaching, right? So he's working for the deep government or whatever. So pretty wild. So let's go to Thomas Narut. This guy, he was all over the news, 1975. I'll read some of these articles. He has a Boys Town background, lieutenant commander, so he's far up there. He's got a doctorate. Lieutenant Thomas E. Narut, the first Navy officer to receive his philosophy doctorate at the University of Southern Mississippi, graduated Saturday during the summer commencement. The 36-year-old Chicago native attended USM under the Graduate Navy Degree Program, so naval intelligence or whatever. He majored in clinical psychology with a minor in educational psychology at Tell. Immediately after the receipt of his degree, he is being transferred to the U.S. Naval Hospital in Naples, Italy, where he will be the chief clinical psychologist for the North Atlantic Treaty Forces. So NATO, he's a chief clinical psychologist basically for NATO. I mean, this is crazy stuff. He pursued his graduate work at Southern from 67 to 69, thereafter interning at the U.S. Naval Hospital, Bethesda, Maryland, for a year. In 1970 to the present, while completing his doctoral dissertation, he's been head of the psychology branch of the U.S. Naval Hospital, Portsmouth, Virginia. His dissertation on psychological stress has generated considerable interest. Dr. Narut is in the process of writing articles for publication in professional journals. There is one of his articles in professional journals. I think somebody found it. I think I have it somewhere. But psychological stress is like a euphemism for traumatic, like personality change, right? So he's focusing on stress. It's kind of a pleasant euphemism. Narut is a graduate of Father Flanagan's Boys Town, Nebraska High School. His mother is Miss Macy. He's married to Carol Johnston. A couple have 3 children. So that's Narut. Killers trained by U.S. Navy. This is July 7, 1975, in Sunday Morning Herald. London. The U.S. Navy has been seeking convicted murderers for retraining in a political role, according to a U.S. Navy psychologist quoted in a London newspaper today. The Sunday Times said that the psychologist, Lieutenant Commander Thomas Narut, revealed at a NATO, right, he works for NATO as a psychologist, revealed at a NATO conference that his work in Naples had involved establishing how to induce servicemen, interesting name, word, ties into hypnosis. How involved establishing how to induce servicemen who may not be naturally inclined to kill to do so under certain conditions. The Sunday Times said that Dr. Narut's story was later categorically denied by the U.S. Defense Department. Dr. Narut, in his 10-minute address, hinted at his work in teaching combat readiness units to cope with the stress of killing. When pressed afterwards on what was meant by combat readiness units, he explained this meant men for commando-type operations, and he said for insertion into U.S. embassies under cover, ready to kill should the need arise. He said training including films specially designed to show people being killed and injured in violent ways, helping the men to dissociate themselves from any feelings about a situation. I'll repeat that. He said, this is very important. He said training included films specially designed to show people being killed, so snuff films, showing people being killed and injured in violent ways, helping the men to dissociate themselves from feelings about this. This is all MK Ultra stuff, right? Induction, snuff films, dissociation. He said that U.S. naval psychologists selected men for these commando tasks from submarine crews and paratroopers. Others were convicted murderers from military prisons. Asked whether he was suggesting that murderers were being released from prisons to become assassins, he replied, quote, "It's happened more than once," unquote. They were trained either at the U.S. Navy's neuropsychiatric laboratory in San Diego or in the laboratory where he worked in Naples. So they had this training thing in Naples. outside of the country, at Sugi and all these other places, or McGill in Canada. Trainees were forced to watch films increasingly horrific and gruesome. Their heads were bolted into a clamp so they could not turn away, and a special mechanism ensured they could not close their eyes. It's a Clockwork Orange, right? It's the Ludovico method or whatever it is. I'll repeat that. Trainees were forced to watch films increasingly horrific and gruesome. Their heads were bolted into a clamp so they could not turn away, and a special mechanism ensured they could not close their eyes. Dr. Narut said that after several weeks processing, the men were passed on, but he refused to say where. However, according to the Sunday Times, at one point in the conversation, he used the Athens embassy as an example and said that his busiest time, when the largest batch went through his hands, was towards the end of 1973 at the time of the Yom Kippur War. The Sunday Times said it had tried after the conference to contact Narut again, but had been unsuccessful. Kind of this kind of is a repeat of that same thing. This is in the London Times. Murderers recruited. Well, allegations that convicted murderers from the United States military prisons were being trained as assassins would start a new controversy over whether the U.S. government ever made use of political assassinations, the Sunday Times reported yesterday. The article by an investigative insight team of reporters said a U.S. Navy officer in a conversation during a NATO-sponsored conference in Oslo last week said the U.S. Navy had been seeking convicted murderers for retraining in a political role. Quoting Lieutenant Commander Thomas Narut, N-A-R-U-T, a psychologist working at the U.S. Naval Hospital in Naples, the newspaper said the training in which Commander Narut had been involved was in 3 stages. The first stage was selection. Commander Narut allegedly said he and his colleagues had been looking for men capable of killing in a premeditated way in Vietnam, perhaps, or in a murder in the barracks, or whom the Navy's tests showed as potentially capable of it. This goes back to the parallax view, right? I just did a show on the parallax view. The second stage was stress reduction training. The men chosen were first taught to shoot, then Clockwork Orange training was used to rid them of any qualms they might have about killing. They literally use the word Clockwork Orange. So fiction becomes fact. The newspaper said, according to Dr. Narut, men are shown a series of special films to heighten their associative powers with regard to killing. The films are gruesome, and as the timing proceeds, they get progressively more horrific. Their third stage was dehumanization of the enemy. In this last phase, the idea is to get the men to think of the potential enemies he will have as inferior forms of human life, the paper said. Untermenschen, right? That's the whole goal, psychology. The report was compiled from conversations between Commander Narut and an Insight reporter, Peter Watson. In Washington, the Pentagon denied last night Commander Narut's remarks. Dr. Narut today denied the Sunday Times report, saying he had not been interviewed. So he's walking it back. This made it all the way to Honolulu. The process takes about a few weeks, according to Dr. Narut, and the men are passed on. He refused to say where the men went, arguing that he did not have the necessary security clearance. So this classification and security, very important theme. However, at one point in our conversation, he used the Athens embassy, so I already did that. Yom Kippur War, 1973. So this made it around the world. There's no question about it. Neuropsychiatric laboratory in San Diego. So there's just so many little neuropsychiatric things. And then he walks it back, right? So here's the Navy psychologist denies assassin training story. Dr. Thomas Narut, the U.S. Navy psychologist, reported to have talked of convicted murderers being trained as hitmen and assassins to be posted to American embassies. Monday denied the story as totally and blatantly false and absurd. But Peter Watson, the Sunday Times reporter who interviewed Narut at a NATO conference in Oslo, Norway, last week, stood by his front page report, which he said was based on nearly 2 hours of discussion. Theoretical only. Narut, a lieutenant commander based at U.S. Naval Hospital in Naples, said in Monday that he had been discussing theoretical, not practical, applications of psychological testing and techniques having to do with assassins. Quote, I know of no U.S. Navy program or any U.S. government program in which personnel were or are trained or conditioned for assassination assignments, Narut said. Then he gets summoned to the bigwigs, summoned to Admiral. A spokesman at the Navy's European headquarters in London, Commander Gene Wentz, said that some of the conversation had gone on in Narut's hotel room when he brushed his teeth. Wentz said Narut had been summoned to London to meet Admiral Thomas E. Engine, U.S. Naval Chief of Staff in Europe. The Navy would be derelict in its duties if it didn't find out what, if any, substance was in the article, Wentz said, explaining why Narut was summoned. No, he got a talking to. Watson, a trained psychologist who was writing a book on military psychology, said, I stand by every word. Talked 1.5 hours. It's true we carried on talking while he got ready for dinner, but we talked nonstop for 1.5 hours. Speaking at a NATO-sponsored conference on stress in Oslo last week, Narut was quoted as saying his work involved teaching combat readiness units to cope with the stress of killing. In the Sunday Times article, Narut is quoted as saying Navy psychologists selected men for commando tasks from submarine crews, paratroops, and sometimes from among convicted murderers in military prisons. It's happened more than once, so he kind of like he's walking it back. Not training assassins. U.S. Navy denies report. So they're just like categorical denial. Navy psychologist, false and absurd. Psychologist denies London assassin story. So it's kind of funny. Darkly amusing. Darkly amusing is probably a better way to put it. This is another one. I saw this recently. This is Seth Harp. He just came out a book about Fort Bragg and alleges that George W. Bush signed secret orders to commit assassinations. Not surprising. And then we're going to go to Program to Kill. Just a couple pages. Chapter 8, Henry, Portrait of an MK Ultra Assassin. It is being like a movie star. You're just playing the part. Henry Lee Lucas describing what it is like to be a serial killer. A U.S. Navy psychologist claims that the Office of Naval Intelligence has taken convicted murderers from military prisons and used behavior modification techniques on them, then relocated them in American embassies throughout the world. The Navy psychologist was Lieutenant Commander Thomas Narut of U.S. Regional Medical Center in Naples, Italy. The information was divulged at an Oslo NATO conference of 120 psychologists from the 11-nation alliance. The Navy provided all the funding necessary, according to Narut. So this isn't the CIA. This is like just the Navy. Dr. Narut, in a question and answer session with reporters from many nations, revealed how the Navy was secretly programming large numbers of assassins. He said that the men he had worked with for the Navy were being prepared for commando-type operations, as well as covert operations in U.S. embassies worldwide. He described the men who went through his program as hitmen and assassins who could kill on command. Careful screening of the subjects was accomplished by Navy psychologists through the military records, and many were convicted murderers serving military prison sentences. So said the Napa Sentinel in a series of articles published in August through November 1991. Anyone familiar with the intelligence community's long-standing obsession with the concept of mind control will immediately recognize what Dr. Narut was describing as an MKUltra project. The existence of this particular manifestation of the project was first reported by British journalist Peter Watson of the Sunday Times, who attended the conference and interviewed Dr. Narut, who had told him they looked for candidates who had shown a proclivity for violence. This was at a time when numerous pseudo-investigations of the intelligence community were being undertaken, including those by Rockefeller, Pike, and church committees. So this is taking place in an interesting environment. Narut told Watson that he was revealing what was obviously highly classified information only because he assumed that it was about to surface anyway. As it turned out, Narut seriously overestimated the interest of the various committees in practicing full disclosure. After making his unauthorized comments, Narut promptly disappeared from public view. He reappeared briefly to make a feeble attempt at retracting his prior statements, but at that point it was a little too late. Watson then went on to expand upon his initial research to produce a book, War on the Mind, which was one of the better books from the 1970s on the subject of mind control and psychological warfare research by the intelligence community. Walter Boelter referenced Watson's work as well, and it's difficult to find Operation Mind Control. So this cat once let out of the bag, proved rather difficult to stuff back inside. The intelligence community, it seemed, was recruiting from prisons to make use of natural talents of convicted killers to produce a fabled Manchurian candidates, otherwise known as mind-controlled assassins. Hold on, just. The operation described by Narut involved killers drawn from military prisons, though there was a good possibility that parallel programs were being conducted in civilian prisons as well. Prisons, after all, have provided fertile ground for any number of MK Ultra sub-projects for decades. As the Napa Sentinel article noted, mind control experiments permeate mental institutions and prisons. That was particularly true in the 1960s and 70s. The NATO conference in which Dr. Narut dropped his bombshell was held in July 1975. Strangely enough, the very next month, August 1975, Henry Lee Lucas was released early from prison to begin his 8-year reign of terror. So it's kind of weird coincidence there. This is Pete Hamill's Conditioning Killers. This is involves this kind of stuff, but we'll go through this. Let's see. One of the theories of modern science revolves around the existence of matter and antimatter. There is a world we see, concrete and specific, and there's a parallel world made of antimatter, which we do not see, but which science is certain exists. Every day now, we are learning that there is history and anti-history. Current history is what the official spokesmen have been telling us for most of the century. Anti-history is what really happened, really well said. And what really happened has often been vile and murderous. Consider the Clockwork Orange revelations. At a NATO conference held in an Oslo hotel 2 weeks ago, some 120 scientists gathered to exchange information on psychological research into stress, most particularly the psychological problems of soldiers. Among the scientists was a U.S. Navy psychologist, Lieutenant Commander Thomas Narut, who works at a U.S. Naval Hospital in Naples. He delivered a paper with the rather banal and jargonized title of, quote, "The Use of Symbolic Model and Verbal Intervention in Inducting and Reducing Stress." I have that article somewhere. But in a later discussion with a small group of people and in an interview with London Sunday Times reporter Peter Watson, Narut explained what the jargon meant. His work for his country basically involved the use of techniques that would get men who did not want to kill other human beings to become killers. There were, for example, combat readiness teams. Who were they? They were men who were trained, in Narut's words, to be assassins and hitmen, placed in American embassies under a variety of covers, and as the Times said, ready to kill in those countries should the need arise. The way they were trained was very much like a Clockwork Orange. They were continuously shown films in which people were killed and injured in horrible ways until they had reached such a point that they were acclimated and able to dissociate any feelings from such a situation. Wow. Like he said in that earlier article, they're literally strapped in and forced to watch, just like Alex Delarge, right? Where did the American government get such men? From submarine crews, from paratroops, from the ranks of convicted murderers and military prisons. Narut was able to clarify this. Did he mean that convicted murderers were being released from military prisons to become assassins and hitmen for the United States government? His answer, it's happened more than once. In his interview with Watson, Narut said that research shows that the best killers are people with passive-aggressive personalities. These men have a lot of drive and appear to be well-disciplined, but have the capacity for sudden explosions of violence when they can kill without remorse. Narut said that he and his colleagues in the Navy have been searching for such men. This is like Parallax View. A good killing record in Vietnam would qualify him, or a good murder in the barracks. The men are given the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory tests to rate a man for such traits as depression, hostility, and psychopathy. Straight Parallax View. If the men pass their tests and others, they are sent for further training to the Navy's neuropsychiatric laboratory in San Diego, or to the facility where Narut works in Naples. They are taught to shoot. They go through the intensified Clockwork Orange training to get rid of whatever abiding humanity remains in them. Film is a key instrument of training, according to Narut, and probably helps to explain why America has been so terrified of films that show sexuality, which is life-giving, and don't even blink at films of violence. The trainee's head is placed in a clamp, and his eyelids are forced open so that he cannot look away. He sees an African youth circumcised with a blunt knife and no anesthetic. It is excruciatingly painful, and when it is over, the trainee is asked, what color was the belt on the doctor's trousers? Or what was the motif on the handle of the knife with which the circumcision was made? Then he sees a man sawing off a plant until his finger is sawed off. The scenes get progressively more horrible. If physiological measures like heart and breathing rate, which respond dramatically during the early films, calm down and resume their normal patterns as more bloodthirsty scenes are shown, the men have passed and can move on to the final stage. This final stage is the process of dehumanizing the enemy. The potential patriots are convinced that the enemy is inferior by the use of slides and lectures that ridicule local customs and portray foreign leaders as evil, an old technique. If you can think of another human being as a dink, a gook, a mick, a kraut, nip, greaser, or an N-word, it is easier to kill him. Narut was vague about what happened to these heroes after they were trained, but did mention the Athens embassy during the period when we were supporting the Greek colonels and a heavy period of training following the 1973 Yom Kippur War. The Pentagon, of course, denied the whole thing, which, given the record for truthfulness by all government officials, is as good as a confirmation. They did confirm that Lieutenant Commander Narut worked at the Navy Regional Medical Center in Naples and that he was a psychologist. I don't remember any politician running on a platform that included the training and development of homicide artists. It seems to me that Narut and all the officers of the Naples and San Diego centers should be placed under oath before a grand jury. And if this story is truth, everybody involved up to the highest levels of the government should end up in the can. So that's Pete Hamill. This is another one, just like about Narut. Can't remember what book this is from. This is from R. Moreau, Toxic Tiramisu. Just like how they strap people in and made them watch movies at Fort Bragg, same kind of stuff. I'll read this whole page. Yeah, I'll put links to these two guys here. You should follow RJ Moreau. Toxic Tiramisu does great research. So does Johnny Pin. Gosh. Another branch of military psychology applicable to elite counter-terrorist units was atrocity research, studies of why atrocities occur and the personality traits associated with killers. A Navy research project led by psychologist Sigmund Struffert was the subject of awkward questions in 1971 by Congressman Cornelius Gallagher, who found the research to be designed to measure how different individuals value human life. In other words, to screen for those who, attaching little value to life, might make good killers. More disturbing is evidence of research into means of conditioning military personnel into more efficient killers. Peter Watson, in his study of the military use of psychology, refers to a 1975 NATO-sponsored conference on stress and anxiety in which U.S. Navy Dr. Thomas Narut lectured on symbolic modeling, by which people could be taught to cope with certain stresses. Techniques, he said, were being used with combat readiness units to train people to cope with the stress of killing. The methods were reportedly used for commando teams and special Navy operatives, and they involved the screening of films, specially designed to show people being killed in violent ways. By being acclimatized through these films, the men were supposed eventually to become able to dissociate their emotions from such situations. Other aspects of the program included training aimed at stress reduction and dehumanization of the enemy. Dr. Narut reportedly also described the screening procedure for men with passive-aggressive personalities suitable for commando tasks. Quote, I already repeated this. So check those out. That's basically it. I mean, the Narut comes and goes, but he seems to have gotten in trouble and then kind of disappeared. Like he was taking, like you just don't see him anymore. It's like he had some kind of a mission and then like was gone. But it is an interesting thing. It ties into Boelter saying that he was recruited in college, and he's Boelter has some element of kind of sophistication. There's also this weird thing, like I think he was married, and he was married, and then he like lived with guys, and somebody showed up at one of his like houses where he was living with this strange man. He says
No,
he had a job
'cause he was
extracting
on
eyeballs.
call
Listen
for
to this.
work, and no, because he was on call for work, and he'd always say, "Yeah, I need rest for work, so I'm sharp," because he was extracting eyeballs. So you gotta be sharp for
I
that.
remember him walking out of the house, or hearing him walking out.
Listen to that again.
No, because he was on call for work, and he'd always say, "Yeah, I need rest for work, so I'm sharp," because he was extracting eyeballs. So you gotta be sharp for
I
that.
remember him walking out of the house, or hearing him walking out.
Extracting eyeballs. I don't know what the heck that means, if that's a real thing. I didn't show, there's nothing in my analysis of him that he was in any kind of medical field or anything. But here they're talking
who
on Fox
disguised
News.
himself as a cop to shoot down Democrat politicians and their spouses. He killed 2 and seriously injured 2 others. Today, we're finding out he wrote a letter to the FBI claiming he was trained by the U.S. military, quote, off the books, and that Tim Walz asked him to kill Amy Klobuchar so he could take her Senate seat. Boelter's facing state and federal murder charges.
Right. So then Didymus mentions Days of Lead. I told you all this stuff was closely associated with Gladio when you mentioned American Military Hospital. Oh, good point. Good connection. The Days of Lead and all that stuff that happened from the late 60s to the early 80s, and it was in Italy. And there's Narut. That's a great connection, Didymus. You're absolutely right. Days of Lead was political violence from both the far left and far right. That's what's confusing about Boelter, is that his NAR stuff is really considered very conservative Christianity, but then he also is a Democrat who's appointed by Walt, like Tampon Tim, right? But like hundreds of people died. There was political terrorism, numerous bombings, kidnappings, assassinations carried out by militant groups across the spectrum. So it wasn't right on left. It was both right on left and left on right. And there was a lot of social unrest like we have today, disillusionment. Far left groups in Italy were like the Red Brigades. They wanted to destabilize the state, and they kidnapped supposedly Aldo Moro. I think there's more to that story. The far right groups had indiscriminate bombings as part of a strategy of tension exemplified by the Bologna train station bombing. State complicity from elements with intelligence services and the P2 Lodge was also later revealed. So you had in Italy connections between intel and like masonry, right? Stone cold masonry. Key events were the 1969 Piazza Fonanta bombing, 78 murder of Aldo Moro, and the Bologna train station bombing in 1980. So yeah, that's a great comment. That's a great comment. Let's see what else we got. Yeah, I haven't heard anything about that NAR center in Dallas. I don't know much about that. Let's see. I'm back on YouTube, so I've got kind of my YouTube channel. Hey, Dystopian Deep Dives is back. Anyway, that's basically it, guys. Narut's, I think, an important part of the story, this kind of training. And like they said in that one article, Narut thought it was all going to be divulged in the 70s. So that's why he you know, said something. He thought it was all going to come out in some of these hearings, but those hearings were all cover-ups. They were not kind of what you would think. They were different than that. But guys, please share the show if you like it. Please check out my Patreon. I've got a lot of shows there. I'll put this on Patreon as well. I post a lot of other things there. It's kind of a legacy Patreon. I started 10 years ago. I also have 5 documentaries on Patreon. My 5 books are available on Amazon and at my website, William Ramsey Investigates. And I do post quite a bit at on X. So you can check out at William Ramsey N. And then some of these guys, let's see if I can go back here and kind of see some of these people who you should check out. But yeah, this guy is really strange. There's elements of sophistication. Johnny Pin Glosh, check that out. Clonny Pin _Gosh. Check out his work. Amuse, I got some stuff from there. There's his manifesto again, which he thinks he's going to die. Jedediah Hartley is at Jedediah Hartley, JEDIDIAHHARTLEY. So check that out about NAR. I don't know much about NAR, so I'm glad that he wrote that. And then the other one was, I think, R.J. Moreau, who, of course, the great Dave McGowan, Program to Kill. It's R.J. Moreau at Toxic Tiramisu, TOXICTIRAMISU. So I'll try to put links to all of those X accounts, and you can check those out. But they've done a lot of fantastic research, so that's basically it. Let me see if anybody's commenting. Do I know how to do the QR code? No, they just dropped a QR code on StreamYard, but I can try to figure it out. It's a new thing they had, so people can kind of click through. But I need to learn that. I'll try to get on that. Anyway, thank you all for listening. Really appreciate it.